into the area on
Okay.
Sunday, but we should see
and I read up on your story with the two basketball coaches, and so let's go here. I'll give you a nice introduction, and it's you're now writing for the Read Option, is that it? Or who all do you write for? What? Real Sport, I'm sorry. Forgive me, Real Sport. I know. I saw the article.
I'm not tied to one outlet in particular.
I've done that myself. It's a tough gig. We can talk about it later. You can tell me how to earn some extra coin here. Yeah, my big thing was I got in with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and I would be sending him articles every week on, just local features, that sort of thing. And sometimes the stories were big, sometimes they were small, but it was always satisfying. So, but I also did a lot of, everything from Sports Illustrated to covering stuff in your neck of the woods and covering the Mets. So, anyway,
There you go.
we'll do that here. So that's who I am. Okay, I'm bragging on myself. We're going to brag on you here in a little bit, Josh. What do you say? Okay, here we go. Josh Benjamin, he's a freelance writer up in New York City, which means the independent journalist can write whatever he wants to. Kind of like a sports talk show host can talk about whatever he wants to. Back in April, he wrote about paying college athletes. Actually interviewed a duo of good basketball coaches, Tubby Smith and Gary Williams, and talk to them about what they had going on. We will be, he's on the line here with us right now. And I guess the first question I want to ask you, Josh, is I know you've written a lot of articles about this, about paying college athletes. Do you feel that college athletes are being exploited? Should they be paid?
Well, I don't think exploited is the right term. It's in the same ballpark, but what the casual college athletic fan may not realize is that these players do receive money in some form. They receive what's called cost of attendance stipends. When I spoke to Coach Smith, he said that his players in Memphis got $500 a month, and that's money in their pocket. It's going to pay for food, going out. So it's not like these players are playing their respective sports and then not receiving anything for it. So I don't think it's exploitation in the most literal sense of the word. But by the same token, when these programs are bringing in millions of dollars a year and a big revenue stream for not just the athletics department, for the university, there is absolutely no reason they should not be paid.
Well, I think one of the things that a lot of people look at is, and someone like me who still, has $6,000 on his student loan, and I graduated in '96, and we see, my goodness, the star college athlete, or even the athlete at a small college, a Division II, an NAIA, he's getting paid, he's getting a scholarship, be it full or partial. Why isn't this enough?
I'm not really sure. I think a lot of it depends on the school, for one thing, because one thing Coach Smith also said is that people think that whatever money the program brings in, that only goes back into the program. It doesn't. It funds the entire athletic department. So let's say that the University of Kentucky, for example, makes $50 million from a trip to the Final Four.
Mm-hmm.
That $50 million, it has to fund basketball, it has to fund baseball, it has to fund women's volleyball. So, and then on top of that, you have John Calipari, who's making, I think, $7 million a year just to be the head coach. And I think that the scholarship money, while it's all fine and dandy, like I said, it's only going to cover a certain amount, because even though the coach is maybe the high profile, it's the players that are doing the grunt work.
Well, that is true, and I understand that aspect of it. I also, and I can't ask you to, talk about another person's work, but I did read, in doing some research for this interview here, Josh Benjamin, a story by Deadspin a while back. And it's interesting you mention how, many times, let's just take a look at Tennessee. Penn State was famous for saying this, that they needed to schedule cupcakes and have an extra home game because it would fund all their sports. Tennessee pretty much the same way. What funds their track and field? The profits that they're going to take in football. However, the question asked about the ethics. Is it ethical to ask a football program to pay for for lack of a better term, a tiddlywinks program, this sort of thing. And they questioned, look, the NCAA requires you to have 14 sports. Is that ethical? Because so many times, especially with big money in college football telecasts, you're asking the football program to fund the lacrosse program. Do you think that's ethical?
I think that's an interesting question, because it's funny you mentioned lacrosse, because I come from a lacrosse family, my brother especially. I think it is ethical, just because, why should one kid get all the fancy toys when the others are just left playing with a standard pail and shovel? Because it's kind of like having a birthday party. You invite one kid, you have to invite all of them. So while programs like lacrosse, volleyball, we'll throw curling in there just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
They may not bring in as much revenue as, let's say, football or basketball, but a lot of it has to do with these TV contracts. So you gotta fund everything accordingly. It's just part of the game.
And the question comes up. We're talking to Josh Benjamin. He is a freelance writer. Back in April, he wrote a piece for Forbes. Impressive. And where he talked to Gary Williams and Tubby Smith about the prospect of paying college athletes. And they kind of, I saw in their story, they didn't want to really come out and make a declarative statement. They did do a lot of dancing around stuff and all, but still, there was enough stuff between the lines, enough quotes on there getting on the record from two prominent college basketball programs. Let me just ask you this. You are the president of the NCAA. You say it's time to do this. How would it work? How would you go about paying college athletes?
Well, I think a big part of it is in coaching salaries, because not a lot of people know this. When Tubby Smith was the head coach at the University of Minnesota, he was making, I think, $7 million a year. He was getting more money than the governor.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to go out and say this right now. I'm probably going to get heat for this. I think that's ridiculous, because for the head of a state who has to create jobs, make a budget, make sure that millions of people are living comfortably without issue, which is an impossible task on its own, the fact that he is making less money than someone who's pretty much a teacher who's coaching a sport, I think that's just a little bit ridiculous. Because Jalen Rose, he was on, I think it was First Take a few years ago. It was one of the ESPN shows, maybe Fox Sports. He said, when you're coach, you've got your coaching, but then you've got your radio show. Then you've got some appearances here and there. Then you've got to run your camps. And so on top of the salary, there's other money coming in from that. So I understand that coaches have to be paid to do it. And Tubby Smith said, hey, I love coaching. I would do it for nothing. I love basketball, but I've got to make a living. I've got to pay bills. Okay, it just goes to, you don't need to pay them that much money. That money can be funneled towards, extended scholarships, extended cost of attendance stipend. The coaches don't need to make millions upon millions of dollars a year for what is essentially, I guess they're recruiting all year round, but the season itself only lasts a few months. So I think that by starting to take a reformed approach towards coaching salaries, then I think you can start doing things with paying the players.
Oh, Josh Benjamin, there you go. I mean, what coach is going to now say, "Oh, yes, I want to make less money"? That's the problem that I see this occurring. But do you think that this is on the horizon? However, because I would throw out that look at the changes in college athletics over the years. I mean, at one time, way back when, there were checks given to players for housing, this sort of thing. The ball game back in the 30s was a whole lot different than in what it is contemporarily. I've done some research on that era, so I can tell you a little bit about that. But going forward, Josh Benjamin, contemporarily, it wasn't that long ago, it's within my lifetime, that the NCAA said, well, wait a minute here, a football team can only be on TV 3 times a year. That is laughable today. So a lot of changes going on in college football. Do you think that this could be something that's on the horizon?
I think it's absolutely on the horizon, because we're gonna use a small political example, even though I promise.
Sure.
There's a whole era of Republican voters that
That's an interesting idea, although I do think that, the idea of volunteering to take a pay cut, sometimes you see, Des Bryant with the Cowboys, you might be doing it to try to restructure or something, but so many times, when you look at that, he's doing it in a way to perhaps help his own longevity. So is he really taking a pay cut, or is he preparing himself for the future when his own brand could be increased if, let's say, he's on a Super Bowl winning team and that would allow him to do so many more endorsements? So I don't know. You're talking here about, would a coach then say, I'm making $5 million now, I will take $3 million, I will take $2 million. Interesting concept. I'm not sure that, coaches in the future, nobody likes a pay cut, that sort of thing.
But right, nobody does like a pay cut, but the fact of the matter is that this topic that we're discussing right now, the conversation's only growing stronger. Now, Mark Emmert, the president of the NCAA right now, he's never going to change anything in this regard because he's a direct disciple of Dr. Miles Brand, and I think that Emmert, as long as he's in office, nothing's really going to advance this conversation. I think a lot of it depends on who his successor is. Is his successor going to be more open to having a deeper conversation about it? Nobody likes the pay cut, but it's like you said, if somebody is talking about something long enough, and then more and more people are talking about it, you can only ignore it for so long.
Well, one of the things that I see about paying players, if it were to come about, how do you think this would happen? Now, one of the reasons I've been kind of fascinated about this is when a story came out last year that in 2016, the Tennessee Volunteers football program made nearly $1 million, and they were the second most profitable football program in America. Texas, what with the Longhorn Network, they were the most profitable, and I'm going from memory, but I think they made about $127 million, and it's the TV contracts. This is why, say, Iowa actually made more money in 2016 than Southern California, which when you think about it, market sizes and, fan bases, you're thinking, is that really TV market? Iowa, Big Ten Network. Think about that for a second. But anyway, where I'm going with this, though, is that it would seem to me that this would be a tremendous advantage for the Tennessee Volunteers if they could use that $100 million that they made and put it into paying the player. Suddenly, the Florida wide receiver that you were losing out on to the Gators or the Seminoles or the Hurricanes, hey, we can pay you more. Come here to Tennessee. That will be a way to get the 5-star athlete that maybe they weren't getting in the past. But is that practical, or do you think that if we start paying the players, it would have to be capped? You'd have to give, this trickle down where the lacrosse player gets paid. Again, it's a big kettle of fish. How do you think it could go about? Could a Tennessee have an advantage the way I spoke of, or would politics try to cap their advantage out of it?
Well, I think Tennessee already has something of a small advantage being part of the SEC because that's the conference where you have Alabama, you have Auburn, you have Florida, you have so many schools with prominent programs, so many deep rivalries, and by the same token, you have so many deep recruiting pools there. So I think that already gives them an advantage. Would a TV network help? Absolutely, but then you have to approach, cable companies. You have to, especially with the Pac-12 network.
Oh, there's a SEC network. We get that. The SEC network is quite prominent. But yeah, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
The SEC network is, but it's not on the same scale as, let's say, the Big Ten network.
No, that's the mother. That's the mother of them, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I think that if you could extend TV revenues there, but also that there's also SEC on CBS that you have to worry about. And with Tennessee, you could do that whole trickle-down paying players thing. It's a conversation that's going to take a while. This isn't something where you just hold a simple referendum vote and then expect to have it resolved within a year. This is going to take time. Now, in terms of how you do that, I really don't know because I am not tapped into how the NCAA's finances work from the top down. But either way, the key here is just keep talking about it because sooner or later, public pressure is going to have the NCAA say, okay, we've avoided this long enough. It's time to take a new look at it.
What about any resentment that comes out? I heard a host say this, and I kind of put this up again. people out there, they start off their life heavily in debt because of their college education. And then they hear, well, on top of my free college education, I want to get a stipend here. And, the guy who just graduated magna cum laude says, well, wait a minute. What did I do for the university? A lot. I improved its academic reputation. I mean, come on here. If we're going to talk about this, I would say that, maybe I helped the medical program advance, if you will, by my surgical skills or my contributions to medicine to come to this department. That's going to mean more applicants and more money to the university. What about me? I mean, I think you have these sort of questions. Could there be resentment and actually a fallback if you started paying players in college football?
Well, there's absolutely that resentment, and I think that resentment might exist already because this was a story about 2.5 years ago. LSU, Louisiana State University, they unveiled a plan to spend $650 million on a lazy river pool that was going to take up maybe an acre land. I have to look back at that, but to have them construct this pool when Louisiana, the state, was having a big problem just paying its state university professors and even luring them to come teach in Louisiana, it just shows where some universities' priorities are. And that said, with that resentment you just mentioned, the onus is on the university to find a way to keep everybody happy.
Sure.
Because, yes, these athletic programs, they're essentially business. They're there to turn a profit for the college. But by the same token, this is an academic institution first. It should be viewed as such. And that said, the onus is on the university president and the athletic directors to work together to find a way to keep everybody happy. It's a tall order, but it has to happen.
I see. Well, Josh Benjamin, he writes for a variety of outlets. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the outlets and some of the stuff you got going on right now?
Well, currently I'm working as the baseball editor for realsport101.com. They're a British website. I have a lot of great things going on. I work part-time for CBS Sports as a production assistant and highlight writer. I've got some stories about Brian Jones, Adam Zucker that are just hilarious. And you can follow me on Twitter at JBsWorld3286.
Okay, we will do that. Baseball editor in Britain, eh?
Sorry, what was that?
A British baseball following.
Yeah, I mean, it's there. I mean, if you go back through history, there was one pitcher for the Cardinals and the Toronto Blue Jays. His name was Danny Cox.
I remember he pitched in Johnson City. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, he grew up here in the States, but he was actually born in England. And then if you go back through history, I think there have been a couple of Scottish-born players.
Bobby Thompson?
Yep, Bobby Thompson. That's right. Shot around the world.
There you go. I know that Bert Blyleven was born in Holland. It's all this. I am familiar with this. Mo Drabowski was born in Poland. So there's a lot of guys that I'm familiar with here on that case. Although I do think that when we go to the World Baseball Classic and we've got, full-blown American citizens like Mike Piazza, and they're with the Italian baseball team because they have Italian heritage. I do sometimes wonder, really, is this?
Sam Paul was Jewish and he was playing for Israel.
Yeah. I that's one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of the World Baseball Classic, if you really want to know, in that case. Anyway, hey, we've been talking to Josh Benjamin, some ideas on paying the players. He thinks it's coming. It could, but there's so many kettles of fishes, and I just think that there's also a fear of resentment there. I think that, you're going to have college presidents when this happens, if it does happen, pulling their programs out, de-emphasizing the athletic programs, saying that's not what we're all about at XYU University. Probably won't happen at a Tennessee. A place with a smaller fan base could happen. And maybe some bigger programs than you would imagine. Anyway, Josh Benjamin, thank you for joining us here. We're going to talk a little more football. Remember, Cody Sense about 1 o'clock on Tri-City Sports Now.
Thanks for having me, son.
It's my pleasure.
The Tennessee Lottery. There's a chance